This idea started out of our community read. Every year, the community chooses a title, and we read it, and we have different programs related to it to get the community to bond over a book. So this year it was Ready Player One, which coincided with the release of the movie, which is tonight or tomorrow. And one of the topics is women in gaming in the text. So that is how this began. And we have a high school volunteer who works in the library, and I was telling her about it, and she's a gamer, and she was telling me that she pretends to be somebody else, and I was so surprised. I'm not a gamer, so this was very educational to me. And as soon as I started reading more about it, I became more and more horrified. So this is a really important topic to me, and as a mom and as a librarian. So I'm going to turn the program over. I have to thank the Friends of the Library for supporting it. I have to thank the Coronado Arts Commission for their support with the community read, all of our events that we've had. So that's been really fun, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Gatos, who is our moderator tonight. So thank you.
Hey everybody, and welcome. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Sarah Gatos. I'm group editor at IDW Publishing, which is a local comic book publisher here in San Diego. We're the 4th largest comic book publisher. My previous life was spent at DC Comics. DC Comics used to have a little studio out in La Jolla called Wildstorm, and I was there for 7 years. So while I am not someone who works in gaming, I think the reason I'm here and the reason that this is going to make for an interesting discussion is because I do work in comic books, which is another male-dominated industry. There are some similar things that we have all experienced, and there are some different things. So I'm really excited to learn new things as well. So to start out, I would love if we could just start on this end, and if you could introduce yourself, and if you could tell us just a little bit about what gaming means to you and in your work, just a little bit, because we're going to get it into in depth a little bit later.
Hi. Hello? Hi. I think you just...
Yeah, that one doesn't sound like fun.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
That sounds like it's on.
I think it's on. It's just you can't hear yourself.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
There,
It's working now. Perfect. Hi, guys. I'm Dr. Janina Scarlett. I'm a clinical psychologist, author, and a full-time geek. I specialize in incorporating comic books and games into therapy to help my clients recover from PTSD, depression, and anxiety.
Welcome.
I'm Margaret Crone, and well, I'd like to start first with gaming is like my life. I have been playing games since I was a little kid, and it's been a dream for me that I've been able to not only be able to play the games that I love, but I've also been able to create games and be part of that. So that has been really cool for me. So I've been a game designer, I've worked in the community, and I also make content, so I'm able to stream on Twitch on my own channels, as well as work for companies and help them be able to broadcast and reach a larger audience as well. So I think that has been pretty amazing for me, and I work for NCSoft currently, but I've worked for a plethora of other companies prior, and I love gaming.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Jenny Tremaine, and I have my PhD in systems neuroscience, and I never thought that I'd be working in games, but through my degree, I started working on brain training games at a university. It was developing games there, and then that led me to Sony PlayStation, where now I work on entertainment games.
Hi, I'm Roxanne Sabo. I'm a very recent college grad, but I've been into games my whole life. I spent a lot of time in college working with the Collegiate Gaming Club, and from there I got a job at Daybreak Games. I'm a community coordinator, which means I essentially manage the communities for our legacy titles, EverQuest, EverQuest 2, PlanetSide 2, so some pretty big ones. I get to work with those communities every day, and it's a lot of fun.
So for you, those of you out there, raise your hand if you self-identify as a gamer. All right, good. So there's a good mix here. But we're going to kind of target this discussion for everyone because I really want everyone to be able to understand what's going on and get involved. So we might pause and define some terms that to you guys, you're like, I totally know already. But have patience with us. We really want to make sure this is relevant for everyone. And as Eileen mentioned, I just want to kind of frame this entire discussion and talk a little bit about why we're talking about this in terms of Ready Player One. There's a character named Artemis in the book that in this big MMORPG, which we'll discuss in a minute, she does not game and present herself as a woman. And this is in the year 2044. And when I first read this book, how many of you guys have read the book? I was like, oh, great. So it's the year 2044 and nothing's changed. So that was kind of the inspiration of this. And I wanted to kind of talk a little bit. In the book, they play in something called Oasis, which is kind of more of a platform. Can you guys talk a little bit about just very briefly, the kind of games there are today? Because traditionally, I started playing Mario, but at this point, there are so many games out there today, and I don't want to just talk about the crazy, huge games that you would play online. I want to also talk about the fact that our phones have exploded our abilities to play games and the kinds of games. So anything from like Street Fighter. Can you just name a couple games off the top of your head that might be like Street Fighter?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you're talking specifically about a variety of different games, there are so many at this point. Not only have people made like MMOs, they've made the fighting game communities, which is what you're referring to.
So that's like a fighting game.
You have FPS games, you have
first-person shooter games.
strategy games.
Yes.
And then you have a lot of sim games these days where there's a lot of, I'm a farmer and I'm pretending to be a farmer type of things, or I'm just going to drive a dump truck around and dump truck things. I don't know.
Right.
Any game that you can think of, there's something there for that. And then also there's social platforms which are creating. I mean, how many of you guys drink alcohol, right? I think there's a lot of people that use On Tap. That is within itself a game, right? There's all these different aspects of our lives that are becoming gamified.
Right.
And that is the terminology that I think companies are trying to create because they want you to get that attachment and satisfaction of doing something and getting something in return for it.
Right. So we all have this image of the gamer sitting in a basement playing games. Like, I really want us to just get rid of that stereotype, put in the back of our heads. That's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about how games are, at this point, everywhere. And like you said, something like World of Warcraft, where it's this massively multiplayer online game. Yes, that is one flavor of gaming, but so is Candy Crush. And, I don't have the stats on Candy Crush, but lots of people are playing Candy Crush. So just some fast facts. According to a website called Statista, in 2017, 42% of gamers in the United States were women. But 11 years ago, it was already at 38%. So I do think that a lot of that rise has to do with the mobile gaming. And sometimes people devalue things like Candy Crush, but it is still important. The largest group was people under 18. The second largest was people that are 18 to 35. The third largest was those 50 years older and above, which I thought was really interesting because, again, you're breaking out of that stereotype.
My grandma's out there, and she was playing that Farmville game forever. She had like 3 timers, like, the cooking timers timed for that shit. I was like, what are you doing with your life? I don't even know.
Yep.
That's worse than me.
And 57% of those over 50 are females. So again, breaking out of that stereotype of the male in the basement playing Warcraft. This is not what we're talking about these days. The downside is that 40% of women report what they're calling cybersexual harassment, which is a weird term, online. So of all these games that we talked about, do you guys think that there are women-style games? Is it like, oh, you just throw some pink on it and some ladies are going to play it? What do you guys think about that?
So in my job as a user experience researcher, our job is to bring people in and get their opinions on the games. And we definitely want female opinions. We seek out those opinions. And, from what we hear from users is that, they just want to play like everyone else. They don't want to have a special, girl type game. They just want to be able to play. But what we do know from research, academic research, and then our own research as well, is that people identify with, if they identify with the characters, that has stronger motivation and more engagement and more enjoyment in the game. So that's something that, looking at these numbers, that as an industry, like, we all need to pay attention to, because it's like going to help grow the community. So we already know women are playing games, so we need to listen and make games that they can identify with.
Right. And to get data like that, I know data just doesn't fall from the sky. That costs real money to be able to do that kind of research. Why does your company think that it's important to spend money on something like this? Or why do companies think that it's important to spend money on stuff like this?
Ultimately, they want their games to be successful. So we need to know, who are we making games for? And part of my job is looking at single games, but then, like, what should the studio do as a whole? And a project that I've been working on for a couple of years now, it's related to positive character representation. So specifically female character representation, because that's something that is really important to me, but also minority representation, because those are two things that have been lacking. And so, we're trying to get those voices heard. And I think when we talk about, people want to play games that they identify with characters they identify with, but if we look at, who's making the games, if they're creating characters that they identify with, that's one thing, but we need to make it more broad, I think.
Right. So I think if we're looking at it from a strictly capitalist point of view, a lot of game companies have said, you know what, there's a lot of women out there who do enjoy this. Why aren't we taking their money? Does anybody else have a thought about what does a girl game look like that they wanted to talk about? Or
I think it's, once again, more important to represent female characters as real human beings. In my line of work, the clients that I see relate to the characters that they play. They build avatars, and for them it's another way to explore some of the things that have happened to them. So I see a lot of trauma survivors who actually are finding healing through playing certain characters, and the more they identify with the character that they play, somebody like Lara Croft, for example, they might be able to find strength and resilience through the avatar that they might not otherwise have. Now, it's a lot more difficult to connect with an avatar that doesn't look like you in terms of your own gender or maybe disability. And I think the more diversity, or even more inclusion, the more inclusion we see in gaming, the more we will see identification, connection, and I think healing and improved experience for gamers.
so yeah, what I'm hearing from you guys, it is not just like slapping lady on it and turning everything pink. It's much more about self-identification and seeing yourself in the games.
I don't think that's always the case either, because I think for me, playing a big brawny dude is also really fun. I do a lot of tabletop RPG gaming, and for me, I sometimes want to play the giant half-orc that has a huge great axe. Like, I don't think that's necessarily always the case. Is like, I want to be a character and I want to be portrayed as like a female always, but I think definitely has been amazing seeing female characters who are very strong, and it's sad that we're so excited because we've seen like 2 or 3, right?
Right.
Where we still haven't seen that many of them. But I think that in regards to just women being able to play games, I think all of us and we all enjoy different types of games. And I think that saying you don't look like a gamer or you wouldn't like that because you're a girl, that's the kind of stuff that hurts, because it's like, I like all kinds of games. I'm just like you too,
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're all gamers, we all enjoy those types of things. But I think that being able to have characters that are female helps a ton. I think whenever I first saw the first female character, for me, it was like, and I got to create and choose and make that, like Ashran's Call, for example. Being able to create a female character, like, I think in a lot of MMOs, you weren't able to always do that. And so it's been pretty exciting for me being like, I can make the character that I want and look the way that I want.
So the options.
Yeah.
As long as the options are there, it's maybe a little bit more welcoming. Is that what you guys find? Cool.
But I want the option to be a dude too.
Totally. The part of the fantasy and losing yourself in it, I think, is important to all gamers. So now we've talked about getting kind of girls playing the game, they're having a great time. Unfortunately, just like Artemis in the book felt the need to play under a different name because she was afraid of being harassed, that is something that everyone on this panel probably has faced at a certain time. And we could probably sit here for a good 3 hours and tell stories, horror stories. But I don't want to focus too much on that, but I do want to kind of define some terms of what happens to women online. The first one that I thought of is just, general sexual harassment, people saying untoward things of a sexual nature, hacking of their accounts. I know people who have had their World of Warcraft accounts stolen from them that they've worked on for a very long time. Doxing. Does anybody want to define doxing for the room?
Sure, I can.
Cool.
Doxing means releasing a person's personal home address or phone number so that they can be contacted and harassed in the privacy of their own residence.
And sometimes that can be in terms of, well, I know you work for this person, or here's your mom, so that they can go and attack them as well. I definitely know people that has happened to. Does anybody want to define swatting? That seems like something that's happened in the last couple of years.
Swatting is similar to doxing in a way where once those people have the address, someone will literally call into the cops or the FBI or a bomb threat or something and give the address. It happens a lot when people are streaming. It has happened when people were streaming, so they'll basically be swatted by the FBI, have cops come into their house, and it has gotten someone killed pretty recently, so it's not a joking matter. Obviously nothing like that should be.
Right, and just kind of trolling in general. All of this kind of under the banner of what is being called Gamergate. And again, we could spend 3 hours talking about what Gamergate is. It's basically a coordinated online harassment by a certain group of people who feel that the presence of women in games have changed games for the worse. I encourage you to maybe do a little bit of research on it, but I do really want to center the women up here and the positive experiences of gamings, so I don't want to stay on it too long. I think it's really important for older people to realize that, when we were all playing Mario Kart on Nintendo 64 or whatever, this was not an issue because there was no internet, there was no online community to really facilitate that. So the internet has kind of exploded access, but it also has kind of exploded the access for people to do untoward things as well. Before we move on, does anybody want to make a comment on Gamergate or how it's affected them in their own life? And I totally understand if you don't want to. And I think that says a lot.
I don't think I want to talk about Gamergate, but
Yeah.
Talking about harassment is a whole nother thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I personally have had an experience where I actually had to get a restraining order on somebody, and that was such a hard process for me because going through the court system for that in an online setting is really difficult. They just don't understand it. I mean, even the judge is just confused by it all. I mean, you can have thousands of papers showing tweets and emails and posts that these people are making towards you, and no matter what, especially even the threats, threatening your workplace, threatening people that you love, and sometimes even that is not enough to prove that this person's a dangerous person, which is frightening to me that someone can get away with doing stuff like that, and there's nothing you can really do, and you feel a little helpless in that.
Yeah. And I do want to point out that sometimes it feels to me like there's no winning. You can be a very traditionally attractive woman, or you can be kind of more of an average woman, and you're going to get it either way. And I do want to point out that it is especially difficult for women of color, lesbian and transgender women that get it even worse. And I'd like to talk a little bit at the end about kind of the ways that we can all work together to form some protection around people, but we're not quite there yet. So I wanted to kind of just talk about a little bit of the psychology behind the harassment. And the way that I put it is, what's the end game for the harassers? Why? There's probably a million reasons, but why do you guys think this is happening?
For many harassers, they don't see the person. So I think that when people are playing online, there's this anonymity for many people. And then there's also the lack of facial connection. There's lack of eye contact. So it's a lot easier to be cruel online than it is in person. And I also think that there's this thought of us versus them. There's this attitude of us versus them. And unfortunately, it creates this culture of considering the other, in this case being women, for example, as less than human. And that will create a lot of animosity and anger and hatred, and as well as certain behaviors that are just completely inappropriate. Now, there are certain behaviors that we as recipients of this kind of abuse can actually do. And one of them is actually responding in terms of, did you know that there is a person at the end of this? Did you know somebody's reading this? And this is actually hurting somebody's feelings. And I've actually had a number of people respond with, oh, I actually didn't realize. Now, that won't always happen. Usually people just won't respond after a while. Sometimes the attack will continue, but usually just allowing the person to recognize there is somebody else who's a human being whose feelings are being hurt is enough to, at least for some people, to make a difference. I think for many perpetrators of bullying, there is an issue of low self-esteem, and people want to elevate their self-esteem by putting others down. And that's a really dangerous road, right? If the only way we get our self-esteem is by putting other people down, we're not going to do very well. So a lot of times people who've done very well online in terms of responding to bullying have asked, actually, what's actually going on in your life? So I've done that too. When I've been harassed, I usually, my first question is, I'm hearing a lot of anger, but also a lot of hurt in your comments. So can you please tell me what's happening? Is there anything I can do to help? And usually I either get no response or I get an apology or a compassionate response back. What I found is bullying is 100% about the bully. And usually it's because something's going on with them that didn't make them aware of the other person, or something that is making them hurt and angry.
Interesting. And do you find that the person doing the bullying, is it different if both of them are male, or is it different if one is male and one is female, the recipient is female?
At least with gaming, I found that people are more likely to have some cruel comments from male to female. However, what I found is that regardless of who the recipient is, if the response can be of a compassionate nature, the attack is likely to stop.
Interesting. So do you think that they are, I think what I'm trying to get at is when the harassment takes that of a sexual nature, whether it's a man or a woman, are there different tactics that can be employed, or do you think the tactics are the same? Because I wonder sometimes if safety concerns come into that.
Absolutely. And I think that everything changes when our life is being threatened. If there's a rape threat, for example, or a life threat, then at that point, I think that comment might need to be reported to authorities, probably retweeted and posted so that other people are aware of this individual, and possibly reported to authorities as well. Absolutely.
Do you guys have any thoughts about what you think the harassers that you've encountered in your life, what maybe the psychology is going on behind their heads, or are you just reacting in anger and you're like, you know what, I just don't want to talk about this at all when you're getting it?
I think she had a really good point, as in social media takes a lot of the humanity out of it. I also run a brand channel, so I will tweet as a game that I'm working on. And when that happens, you get the same attacks directed towards like the game, and people don't seem to realize, hey, the same person you're asking to do things or responding to nicely as like their name. If I'm responding from my personal handle, it's funny because, well, there's still that harassment. Sometimes responding as a person will get kind of a different reaction than responding as like the entire game. So that's something that's really interesting to how it just says a lot about how people view, other people versus just something they can straight out attack. It's something I've had weird experiences in, and especially when they don't realize you're talking to the same person in two different places, it really kind of says a lot.
So as a community manager, you are both representing a brand, but you're also kind of overseeing, is it a message board or what kind of?
Yeah, for me, it's different for every company, but I oversee forums, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, Twitch chat when we have a stream. Pretty much all avenues is where I am, whether I'm there in a brand presence or as Roxanne, the community manager presence. I definitely make the effort to communicate through as many channels as possible, and it's also really interesting to see how channels themselves can be different. Kind of depending on the platform, you can end up with really different things where someone on Reddit might go on a very long, it can still be inflammatory, but a very long post. It might be a better place to have a conversation where you can go back and forth, where on Twitter people tend to be shorter and more biting. It's definitely interesting to see how things can change across the platform.
When is part of your job to keep an eye out for harassment?
I definitely moderate all of our channels, so yeah, a lot of that is keeping an eye out for harassment.
Do you delete it when you see it, or do people get a warning, or do you just ban them?
It depends on the platform. Oftentimes, it's most of the time deleted. Twitter, you can't delete things,
Right.
which makes things a little more complicated. Often get a warning, and then when things are really horrific, like she mentioned earlier, you can't always reach back out or even get that warning. You sometimes just need to ban them right away because, some things are just
There are
not
a
okay to
variety of
say.
severity levels.
Yeah.
Right. And is that something that you have well established with your bosses, that they're like, this crosses the line, boop?
The thing that makes it hard is a lot of it is a judgment call, and that's an important thing to consider. Is you need to know. I mean, I've had moments where I've been like, hey, gut check me on this. Am I responding emotionally because I am a female? Maybe someone made a comment recently that was somewhat sexist, not horrific, but it upset me. And I went to one of my male coworkers and I was like, am I going too far banning this person or responding the way that I am because I'm reacting emotionally to it? I mean, it's important to take into consideration. He was like, no, it's totally okay. A lot of it is a judgment call, but it's important to consider like where these players are coming from, and how much they're out to hurt and how much they're upset by something completely different. So
Cool. Well, I'd kind of like to leave harassment there and kind of move back towards the games. So I definitely started gaming on the original Nintendo. How about you guys? Yeah. So obviously the women there were portrayed by little boxes, little pixels, and things have changed so dramatically now. For example, the most recent Tomb Raider movie. Did anybody else see that here? A few hands. So originally in the Tomb Raider movie, if I can get a little bit graphic about her body, her breasts were literally like little pointy triangles. And in the recent movie, there was some outcry that they felt that, oh my gosh, what's her first name? Alicia Vikander, is that her name? Something like that, that her breasts were not big enough to portray the character. So something like her body was seen to be completely part of her
And
character.
this is the lady who does all of her stunts. Like, she works her butt off. Like, that's just insane to me. Like, thinking about somebody who can physically do everything that we look at in a Lara Croft, game, and we're like, this is insane. She's holding onto the side of a building. She's jumping from this vine to that thing, and you're just like, no one can humanly do this. No, she's doing it. Like,
Right.
That's, to me, is just crazy. I just can't fathom people thinking that.
Yeah, definitely. So the ways that women have changed, their bodies have been portrayed in games has incredibly changed. And I definitely see it becoming more realistic, as we were talking about before. In your research, do you get specific feedback of like, women like to see this, women don't like to see that?
Yeah, we actually did a study trying to answer that question with both men and women, because we wanted to know, like, well, what do women want, but like, what's okay for men in a female character. And so what we did is we showed a bunch of images of game characters. Some were really well known, some were less well known. There was a spectrum of sexiness as well, and we just said, showed them and said rate them from a 1 to 5 for a like, dislike, based on their looks alone. Just kind of like a gut reaction. Characters that were really well known, they were not only voting on looks, which we could tell, but the characters that were less well known, looking at that spectrum of sexiness. People in general, men and women, they want characters that are realistic. That they look like what they should be doing in the game is reflected, like in their clothing, in their body shape. So one thing that I did was categorized the characters as either highly recognizable, so those like nostalgic, I love this character, and then characters that were wearing like functional or armored attire, and then ones that were wearing like sexy or naked, and then rank them from like the highest rated to the least rated. And what was true for both men and women is that those characters that were wearing more functional attire, those were grouped more up at the top, and that those who were wearing more sexy attire were grouped more at the bottom. And this was true for both genders. I will say for men, it was like a little more, there was like a more of a range on the sexiness, but that's okay. I say, make something for everyone. Like, you don't have to take away all the boobs, but like make some with no boobs.
Did you see any difference in age group as to how they reacted?
Yeah, I mean, a little. There's a lot of people who came in, people who were a little bit older, like in their 30s or 40s, and they were like, I have kids. Like, I want to play this game and not be like embarrassed, with my children, or this isn't the role model I want to show my daughters or even my sons. Maybe I would say younger would maybe be the more skewed, but we tend to get a lot of young gamers anyway, like who come in for our testing. So it's not, I would say it's not totally an age-related thing.
Interesting. In your practice, do any of the women come in and do they talk about how the way that women are depicted affect how they see themselves or their own self-esteem? Or
Absolutely. I've had a number of women that I've worked with who have experienced sexual assault, who've reported that playing certain games was triggering for them, like playing Grand Theft Auto, for example, was triggering for them, the way that women were depicted as objects. And I've had women who were able to use certain avatars actually to help them, to motivate them. And there's certain phone app games that have actually been really, really helpful for people with PTSD and depression, like Pokemon Go, for example, where people can build their own avatar and also can use it to both exercise and in a way socialize, and it's kind of a collaborative game. So I have seen it, and I think that when the portrayal is negative, it can absolutely be devastating. It can even be triggering. But on the other hand, if you can allow for more diversity and inclusion, it can be an extremely positive experience.
I think the fact that people are even asking these questions represents a huge change. And really what that comes down to is the women behind the scenes, like you all here. I wanted to use this opportunity to kind of talk about that. The most recent Independent Game Developers Association survey says that still 79% of the workforce is male, 71% is white, and 69% is without children. However, 81% of the respondents say that workplace diversity is very or somewhat important. Where do you guys think that disconnect is between the fact that people are realizing that it's important, however, the representation behind the game is still not there? And obviously this is speculation on all of our...
I mean, I think from my research and talking to the developers and designers, it's a lack of awareness. And so bringing that awareness it's been a lot of positive reactions. So from our own studio, and then trying to get out the research that I've done to more designers and developers, because I think more people that hear it, the more change that can happen. And so, bringing that awareness is the first step.
And do you think kind of organizations like the one that we're working with today, is it through outreach to kids in school? How does that, do you think, translate into people actually staying in the industry? For you, for example, I mean, did you always want to work in games, or was this something that was just like, I didn't even know I could do this?
I mean, this is a great question for me because I grew up loving games, and by the time I hit high school, I definitely went through a phase where I was like, I didn't want to tell people I played video games because that was lame, and I was a girl and I wasn't supposed to do that. And I got back into college and I was like, what am I doing? Like, this is all I care about. I think outreach is super important. I think showing girls, hey, you can be a part of this, is something that really does need to happen. My company is great. My department I'm in is actually a majority of them are female, but granted that is marketing, and there is a smaller number of females on the dev side, but there still are a number of them, and I'm seeing more and more women kind of just go for it and get into the industry. I think it's really important to, like I said, do that outreach, especially reach out to younger girls, before they hit that age where you kind of get self-conscious. Like, I've been through it as a teenager, and like, I don't know if I can do this. People are telling me I can't do this, and just be like, no, it's okay. This is an inclusive environment. You really have to kind of like make that push to let it happen. It's going to be a slow transition, but I think it's just kind of slogging through.
So Daybreak, literally spends money on someone like you and the community aspect of that. Why do you think that is?
Building a community is super important, especially for us. Our games, a lot of the games I work on have been out from anywhere from 5 to almost 20 years, and we are still adding to them, still making content. And a big reason we do that is because we're fostering these communities, actively engaging with them, being like, what do you want to see? How can we make this your game that you want to stick with and be a part of? So I think it's really important to kind of foster those communities on your own, to give your players a space where they want to be a part of, and they feel like they're connected to, the company on the developer side, and they feel like you really care. It's a really unique kind of circumstance. It's not something like you were saying before. It has a lot to do with the online. Like back when you were playing Mario, you never had anywhere where you could go talk to someone from Nintendo and be like, I want more green turtles. Like, that's just not what happened. So with the social platforms and all the connectivity online, it's a really unique experience for us to have kind of a two-way conversation with our player base. And it really shows. It feels really good to have a player be like, hey, this is a great idea, or I designed this thing, and then being able to utilize that. It makes the games really unique and a fun thing to be a part of.
That's awesome. So I wanted to talk about something that's specific to you too, and that you kind of do competitive online gaming. Would you say that there's a community around that as well? That kind of, how does that affect the women that you're also playing with?
Ooh. Competitive gaming is a totally other realm of things. I mean, I think Roxanne can probably also attest to this with her games, because you have the core community that you have that plays PvE content, and then you have, depending on your game, some games are pure PvP. And then if you have a game that has both of those things, you have a totally other portion of your community that is into a competitive aspect of things. And cultivating that can be a little bit more intense, I think, sometimes, just because you have people who by nature are supposed to be rivals, who you're building these stories of these people who are struggling to compete to make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year competing in a video game. And it's, I think, to some people still kind of crazy that you have kids who can do this, but I think yeah, totally, you have another community that you have to build and cultivate. And I think sometimes it can be really rough to get people who are supposed to be competing together to also still kind of respect one another and show good sportsmanship, which I think can be difficult in an online setting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, considering that the entire point of it is to be competitive, like in sports, there might be a little bit of trash talk. Do you guys police each other, and do you say, well, you went a little too far there? How does that really work for you all?
I'm not going to talk specifically about NCSoft, but I know a lot of games in general do, and I think that it's very important to have rules for competitive players, especially your pro league players, is making sure that they know you can't get away with that kind of behavior. And talking to people like that, especially your fellow competitive contestants, you have to make sure that you're treating them respectfully. And I think a lot of companies will either fine players for saying certain things, or in some cases remove them from the tournament completely. So I think people need to continue doing that, continue giving people that severity level of, you cannot cross this line. This
holding people accountable.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is not acceptable to treat people like that in any setting, not just competitive setting. But
right.
You're right. Sports have the same type of thing. And I think when it comes to esports, people are doing the exact same things. It's just trying to make sure that we're cultivating good sportsmanship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing in your practice, people may come to you talking a little bit about experiences that they may have had gaming. Have they been able to show both the bad and the good of the community aspect? Do you find especially girls kind of grouping together? How do they talk about it when they talk to you?
I mean, it's certainly varies across the board, but I think the people that do really well are the people that do find community. And I've had a number of conversations with parents of teenage girls that I was working with to explain to parents that actually when these individuals are spending time online, they are connecting, they are socializing, and they're finding their core group of friends. Through going on certain quests, these girls are slaying their own demons. They're learning how to overcome their own anxiety. So when they're facing anxiety at school, if they do some kind of a quest with their friends online, that allows them more self-confidence. So I find that the more people are able to bond that way, and whether it's a connection with an actual person, or a connection online with a player, or even a connection with the character, because I think that's a connection too. That can in a way foster a community as well. All of those connections are necessary for healing. I mean, we humans are social creatures, and when we connect with others, even if it's with a fictional character who's had a similar experience to us, our bodies release these chemicals called oxytocin. This is a bonding chemical that allows us to at least temporarily feel better about our experiences. So I find that certain games can be extremely helpful that way.
Oh, that's great. Before we run out of time, because we do want to do some Q&A, if you were talking to a lady, maybe even a younger lady, and she was being harassed, every situation is different. What would be a tip that you might give her?
I'm not sure. Go first.
I deal with it every day in my line of work, directly with my job. It's my job to interact with the community, and there's always going to be those people that are angry for whatever reason. Honestly, the best thing that helped me is to just ignore it. It can be the hardest thing to do. There is something to be said for sometimes reaching out to those people, but if it's a personal attack based off of, what you do, especially playing video games or something you love or are passionate about, the best thing to do is ignore it, and know that for every one person that's harassing you, there are 100 that are supporting you, even if it's silently. The loudest ones are usually the angry ones. We refer to them as, very fondly, as the vocal minority. And it's just something you always have to keep in mind, and your skin will get thicker. That was something I was always super sensitive growing up, and my mom was like, you want to go in a community? Like, are you sure that's a good idea? And it's something you really learn to kind of ignore, remove yourself from the situation, and know it's about them and not you.
Yeah, I'd say don't quit. Like, don't let, if you like it, don't let them make you quit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think those both are great examples of what you should do. I think it depends on the severity of what's happening too. I think sometimes you do need to get, if you're a young child, getting an adult involved. I know it feels like tattling, but I think at the same time you need to think about your safety and
Safety first.
Yeah, but I think in general, do what you love. I mean, people were telling me when I was younger, spending 100 hours a week playing video games is going to get you nowhere. But look where I am. I'm able to make games. I'm helping create, and communities of people who love and enjoy games, and who support each other in times of not only just gaming, but in times of need of I think building that community. I think when you were talking about that, that hit me really close, because I used to be that shy kid who never talked to people, who kind of I only made friends through my boyfriend's back there, through him, because he was the social person in high school, and I was like, I'm going to go to school and do work, and that's all I care about. I don't care about people that much. And I think what made me care about people was playing MMOs and building that community and meeting people who I think helped me realize that people are there are good people out there who you can find.
It's
you'll
true.
find the right people.
Yeah. What about you?
I would actually tell that little girl to treat this as a game. If this is a challenge, if this is maybe a monster, a dragon that showed up in your game, then you need to get your crew together, right? Get your sidekicks, do your slaying, and keep on your quest, because ultimately you're the hero of your journey.
That's great. I love that. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention, if anybody out there is having trouble Googling two-factor authentication on all your passwords, that's something that I hear coming up a lot, so that you're not as easily hackable. So just making sure that your online security is on point, so that people can't come at you that way. So I'd like to open it up to question and answers. We're going to get the microphone going over here. Oh, cool. And if you have a question, if you want to come up to the mic.
Don't be shy. Come on.
He's gonna start it off. Yes.
We'll compromise.
Well, I just really want to know if you had statistics on male and female in the e-sport thing. Like, what's the ratio to
Yeah, so I think there's people on Twitch who probably didn't hear his question, but his question is in regards
Do
to.
it again.
Yeah, free if you want.
Do you guys have stats on the ratio between men and women for like competitive games?
I don't have like stats off the top of my head, but I know that there are definitely more men that are in competitive esports than women. I don't think that that's necessarily always going to be the case. There are a lot of esports specifically that are trying to target and have women tournaments, or even trying to bring those females into the space. And I think you're seeing that more as we get further into the esports realm of things. And I hope that we continue to see women in that space. I think a lot of it comes down to like the marketing of that too. I think a lot of people are really. It's changed a lot. I think even when I was a kid, I was told, there were commercials literally of people playing Nintendo and the boy being like, "Oh, you can't play." Like that was a thing. I mean, you can go watch it. Now it's a lot different. We are welcomed into the space, and I think even young women are implored to play video games. So I think that we'll see it change. It's going to be a slow pace, but it's getting there.
But if you were to come up with like a marketing scheme to increase women in competitive games, do you have any ideas on like?
Literally just showing you. I think it really is a if you see it, you can be it sort of situation. So I think the more that younger women see people like you playing, the more they're going to be like, oh yeah, I can do this too.
I wouldn't say me necessarily, but there are some amazing female players out there who I think should and deserve more spotlight and don't get enough of it. Because I think a lot of times the stories that are driven through esports news is a lot of the times built around drama and the rivalries of competitive play. And sometimes they're over really silly things. But I think that hopefully that will change, and hopefully the people who are reporting those things will focus on the right spaces for that.
Hi. It's not so much a question, but I was hoping if we could talk a little bit more about portrayal, not as how big are her boobs and how small is her waist, but what she's actually doing and how she functions as a thing that is on camera. Something like if you took Quiet from Metal Gear Solid and you look at how she's supposed to be a really strong and very formidable opponent and later on in the game, but the entire time she spent with her on frame, she's very sexualized and of course nearly naked. In case anybody doesn't know about that, there's supposed to be an in-game thing for that, but doesn't make
There's a story behind it.
any sense. Yeah. Or if you took the modern iteration of Lara Croft from the Tomb Raider series versus her older self, where she's wearing things that are more obvious, but she's not just wearing things that are more geared towards actually surviving in an environment and towards being an actual archaeologist. But in the game, there's a lot less time with her being sexualized or responding as though the player is sexualizing her. And I was just hoping if we could talk a little bit more about how the actual characters are treated and less about if they got boobs or not.
Yes, we need more Aloys in the world, please.
I mean, that came up in the research study that I was referring to as well. And I mean, I think people are aware, both men and women, like when we were talking about the characters, and they would look at their attire and think about what are they doing in the game and like, does this make sense? And so, what are they supposed to be doing? And like the men were more angry about high heels than the women. Like they were like, why is she wearing high heels? And so I think they tied together. But like, yes, they need to be represented. They need to look like not naked, and they need to be just as powerful as a male character. And I think that there are some good examples recently. Aloy from Horizon Zero Dawn is one of my favorites as well. And then also the Uncharted Lost Legacy as well are some good examples where I think they are doing what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think coming from like a game design background, I think a lot of it too is people when you're creating characters, and this goes out to my designer bros out there, really think about the character that you're creating and the story that they're building. I think what you're explaining is like, they have a job, why don't they look like that job? Why are we portraying people in a certain way? Is it just because we think, oh, we're going to get more players through doing that? And I mean, if research is showing that that's not the case, then I still don't quite understand what's happening on that front. I do see that when we are doing character design and character creation, things are changing. It's just, again, one of those slow things.
People are afraid. They think sex sells, and even though the research is saying it, they're afraid to make that leap. But just keep pushing, bringing more women into the industry.
And I don't think even just women. I think men who are in those spaces, if you have the power to control character design and you're the director of art for your company, work hard at creating characters that everyone wants to enjoy. And I think everyone wants strong females. They want strong male characters. I think we want things from both aspects of the sides. But I think that it really comes down to the people who have that power to create, to make those right choices, because us as users want them.
Kind of going back to a little bit the harassment and stuff, it's awesome that there's conversation going on and awareness is being driven, more inclusivity. And you mentioned how women can handle and deal with those issues. I'm kind of wondering, on the flip side, are there conversations going around sort of with the larger culture with men, like sort of preventative discussions to sort of flip that culture so that women don't have to deal with it as much?
I know there are men who are doing women in gaming type panels themselves too, who are trying to promote that healthy behavior. So I know that on both sides, I think everyone's fighting for it. I think the majority, like, there's a lot of gentlemen here. I mean, a raise of hands, how many of you feel like women should be treated just as fairly as you in games, right? No one here is going to not raise their hand. So I think, like, that is the case, and a lot of it is when your friend says something that is derogatory towards women, you being like, hey, bro, that's not cool, And I think that type of thing, and the word of mouth and being vocal about it, and not only women being vocal, but men being vocal about it, is going to be just as important as us coming up here and talking about it.
Yeah, and I think just confronting sexism in general, because the female characters that we all know and love, they're so badass and awesome that little boys need to be as excited to play a girl character as we are. So anything that we can do as a society to just break down sexism in general, I think, from when everybody's this small going up, it will have a cumulative effect.
This reminds me of a couple days ago, one of my friends, he has like a little daughter, and they're playing through the new Zelda game, and she keeps calling Link Zelda, and he's like, no, I'm just gonna let her keep doing that, because she thinks that Zelda is like a girl, and he's just totally cool with that. And I think that to me was really funny, because I'm like, oh, I think you want to see both sides of that, and I hope we see more. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add on that front.
Thank you.
I've got a 12-year-old niece who's looking to get into the video game industry. She hasn't decided yet whether it's development or esports or streaming. What are some good resources that you guys could point her out to that would help her in her journey?
I mean, I think I have a PhD in systems neuroscience. I did not think that I was going to come into games. So I think that, like, whatever your interest is, like, there's an avenue in games, and to find out, what you're passionate about and learn how you can apply that in games.
I have healthcare administration and music theory degrees, so I am also in that, and I don't use either of those really. I think this is the advice that I give to everyone. I get this question a lot in streams, is like, how can I get into the game industry? And I think the main thing is, step one, figure out what you want to do. Step two, look into how you can get to where you want, like, what the requirements of that are. So if you have a job that you're looking at specifically, what are the requirements for that job? Do that. Step 3, profit. Like, that's literally it. That comes with any job. That's not only just game industry. That is, if you have a passion in life, do the thing that is going to help you be your passion and be successful in that, and work really hard at it and never stop. Don't ever let anybody tell you that you're not going to be successful in it, because if you work hard in that enough and you're dedicated enough, sometimes it will take a long time, but you'll get there.
And also identifying places near to her that offer internships or just informational interviews. Again, I think when younger people can come into an office or a studio and see the women that are working there and ask them questions about what their background was and what their skill set is, it just kind of breaks down all the fear of like, oh, maybe this isn't for me.
Yeah, I would definitely say, like, I mean, she's obviously still very young, but when she starts getting there, like, do everything she can to put herself in a position where she could work with gaming. Like, for me, I started from an internship, and I was like, okay, here's every single place I could, like, live over the summer. Here's every single company. And I was emailing people, even if they didn't have openings, probably a little obnoxious. I immediately, when I thought my internship was going to end, I was lucky it didn't, but I was looking for esports writing jobs, even though that wasn't necessarily 100% sure the path I wanted to go on. You can always branch out too. It's important to know what you want to do and where you want to go, but if you know, for me, I knew video games and I didn't know what, so it was important for me to kind of explore those different communities, even on a day-to-day. Like, online communities can be really helpful. There's I'm pretty sure there are websites and forums. They're game dev, and they're like game jams, like smaller game dev communities. Especially when she gets to college, there are a lot of people really interested. So just, even if I was like, I'm never going to be a game developer, but I would go talk to the game development club and be like, what are you guys doing? You're the kind of people I wanted to work with. Just kind of integrating yourself in those communities. The game industry is very small. So getting to know as many people as you can is great, because you all want the same thing and you can help each other.
And I've been in this for like 12 years now or something like that. And you will run into the same people at every company. And you'll often find that it is a very small industry. So don't burn your bridges.
I do the job now that Maggie used to do.
Yeah.
And we met each other today. So that just kind of goes to show.
Yeah, because I've seen her doing a lot of stuff. And I was like, yeah, she is doing exactly what I was doing, 5 years ago. So.
Thank you.
Yes, we have a question from Twitch. Does the panel believe that women on Twitch who try to sexualize their streams for viewership create a detrimental effect on women gamers?
I think, I can't answer for all the women that are out there, but if we're going to be supportive of women in gaming, that means being supportive of all women, regardless of how they want to present. So I just wanted to kind of open that up and start the conversation there.
Right. This has been a huge issue on Twitch, especially as of late. There have been a lot of conversations about it, a lot of very angry conversations about it. From both sides. I think it is definitely important to, like Sarah said, let women dress however they want. It's a big concept of, kind of a hard concept of, well, you dress this way, so you're going to be treated that way. That needs to stop. On the same time, I believe the question did say sexualized, so if you're playing up to it, you might be in the wrong place a little bit.
Also, they just changed their TOS, so
exactly, like,
it's your intent now. So whatever if your intent is sexual, then you will be removed, or supposedly supposed to be removed.
That is what I mean. If the intent is there and you're not, you're there with a different intention. I think that's definitely negative, and it does have a negative kind of impact on the rest of. It can have. It's hard. It's a very hard subject. It can have a negative impact on other women because people tend to get very defensive, and people will group women together even though they shouldn't. Like, it happens when people are being harassed. But if someone's just wearing something and you're like, oh, she has boobs and I can like see cleavage, like, that shouldn't be an issue. It's not an issue. It's nature.
As a streamer, I feel like the thing is, the people who are watching those streams are not going to necessarily watch mine. And so for me, I don't feel like that person is stealing my viewership in any way, shape, or form. I think that we all have been basically saying, let them do their thing. If you have a problem with it, the power that you have as a viewer is to not watch it. If you want people that are not doing that to be successful, if you want people who are, doing a certain type of stream to be successful, watch those streams and don't watch the other ones. I think that is your power as a viewer, and our power as creators is to create content that we feel is befitting what kind of community we want to create. And if that's the type of community somebody wants to create, great, let them have that community. Let them have that space that they're comfortable in. And I mean, that's just not my jam, but it's not, it's clearly someone else's jam.
Any other questions here?
Let's see. Does this stretch upwards? Okay. I want to thank all you ladies for everything you do and for living your life to your potential and continuing to break that glass ceiling up there. It's great that we have people like you, and you influence us a whole lot. And I'm sure that things will turn out fine. And if not, you'll make them fine.
Hi, so I had a question about where do you draw the line between inclusiveness and I guess the artist's vision? Because myself, I'm a music composer, so it's always in the back of my mind. There are certain tropes and there are certain precedents that you kind of have to follow if you want to make money. Because I know it's a different medium. Let's say Dragon Ball Z is Toriyama. He's the creator of the series. He likes to subvert expectations. So some of the characters look very strong, but some don't. And the ones that don't usually end up being the most powerful ones. So where do you draw the line between, hey, they're going to expect them to look like this, but this is the artist's vision?
I wonder if this is not so much of a line as it is what is the function of that, right?
I guess, yeah.
So, and I think that in a way that is the answer, that I think as a creator, we can ask ourselves, what is the function of this? If my character has to look a certain way because that tells a better story, fine, then it works for the story. But if I'm making them look sexualized because I think it will sell, then does it really serve that purpose? And who is it going to hurt?
Okay.
I think too, it's really interesting now in gaming, artist vision, as you said. Sometimes it's hard to even think about an artist vision in a multi-million-dollar A++ game. Is there really an artist vision? But now that there are so many more indie games and so many indie game developers, I think the different expressions can be more readily found than ever before. And I can only see that exploding over time. I don't know how you guys feel about that. But.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I would say looking at across all games, and if we look at kind of what we have now, there is a majority of white male characters, and that can't be the only vision, And so I think we should have a wider, listen to the vision, but let's, there could be one white male character, but there should be many more.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're going back to the character creation line of things, and I think sometimes you want there to be a surprise, right? Mm-hmm. I think when you're building a story and you're you want this character to look meek and not strong, but in the end they become the powerful character that everyone's whoa, that stuff is freaking awesome. I'm a huge Dragon Ball Z fan, so I feel you, bro. But I think that at the same time, creating characters that people can relate to, because we've seen that stereotype can sometimes be okay. I think you just have to find the balance, right?
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you.
More questions?
I have one more on the same topic. So lately, games, games they have this algorithmic customization kind of thing. I don't know if you've seen that. You can just League of Seas or Lost of Seas has it. There's games where it's completely customizable. Sea of Thieves has that ability. It's fully customizable. Do you have an idea as to, generally speaking, for women, do you think it's a good idea to make games that are purely custom like that, or would it be better to make characters that you can kind of franchise around?
I mean, I think it depends a lot on what kind of game you're building, really. I mean, in general, again, I have a marketing perspective a little bit. So if you're building a massive MMO where each player is portraying the character they either want to be, I did research on this in college. A lot of what people like in MMOs is getting to be something they can't be in real life. So I think for something like that, having something really customizable is great and a great opportunity. But if you do want like a set character that you're franchising around, and you want to have a powerful, like rememberable, that's a word, character, it's kind of more, I think in that case it's more important to have a distinct character design, so you can really bring that character to life. Specifically, that's kind of assuming they would be an NPC. But I mean, there are definitely benefits to doing both. I don't know if that answers your question, but
I don't really see it as like a women-specific question. I think it's just a gamer question.
Yeah, I think you're looking at either very open world, dynamic world creation, which I think is fantastic. I think there's a lot of people who want that. I know I definitely love that kind of stuff. But you also you can combine that with like a linear path. I think Subnautica, people who know me know that I've been playing that pretty deeply. But you have a very linear path, but you have like an open world-ish way to get to that linear path. Witcher is a great example of that too. Like there's so many games that you can either go open world, you can go linear, you can, like, that's the beauty of games, is there's something out there for everyone. And when it comes to character creation, I think, you made a good point, is like if you're making a non-player character, that's what NPC stands for, you want something to be memorable. You want something where people see that character, they're like, oh, I know that character. And the ones that are the strongest and have the best personalities or are deeply in line with the story. I mean, when you look at books, I think, we've been talking about Ready Player One. The reason why Artemis is such a strong character and we remember her is because she played such an interesting role and she did some interesting things that were like, that's what makes you memorable. And I think you can get that same aspect not only in the medium of books, but also in the world of gaming.
See, that's the worry. If it's fully customizable, it's cool because then you can really create something that's like you. But then it's probably not going to be so memorable because it's not going to be like Sonic or Mario or Lara Croft. So I'm just wondering if there's any stats on like.
But you look at people who play MMOs. Like I played EverQuest for the longest time, and I still, I remember those iconic moments of not of like necessarily my character being Sonic or my character being that character, but the moments of my guild and my, like us doing things and creating and like completing epic tasks. Like I think you can have those type of feelings, but then they're less driven towards a character and more driven towards a moment and like the exhilaration of completing something, if that makes sense.
I think it's almost like recalling a story. Like even if you play through, like you brought up The Witcher earlier, and you're obviously playing a set character in that game, so it's like when you look back and it's like, that was an awesome game, you remember the story and what you went through. Where if you're in an MMO and you have this epic moment, it's like, I experienced that. So it's definitely a kind of a different setting. Like they're two very different things.
And you can have games that don't necessarily have story. You have games like Minecraft. I think like that, I mean, you can play a more story driven because there's so many mods now, but if you look at like just the vanilla Minecraft of just like the first time you die to a creeper, like that is a moment that I think many gamers have experienced and laughed about, And I think like it doesn't always have to be a story driven thing or an NPC. It can be open world, and you can still create those moments.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Well, then I just want to thank everybody for coming today. I found this fascinating. I learned a lot. And I wanted to end with one more question for everybody here, is what game would you recommend to a non-gamer? And you want to start it at the end, or maybe one that you would recommend to one of your patients?
Sure. Well, those are different. What I would recommend to a non-gamer is Minecraft. There's a creative mode where people can just play without a threat of being eaten, or or you can play in normal mode. But so to a non-gamer, I would probably recommend that. To my clients who are coming in with different things, there are certain games that I would recommend. So for veterans that I'm working with, I would recommend Call of Duty. For people who have experienced grief, I would recommend Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, which is actually a game that helps people process and understand grief in a multi-sensory perspective, so visually, auditorily, tactily. So it would depend on what people are coming in for.
I'm gonna go a little more generic with this because I know I don't want to take something from somebody else down the line. I think for me, I've always when it comes to people who don't play games, because I'm definitely one of those people who I've tried to convince other friends to play games. I think the best success that I've ever had, and I think it's mostly because I have a lot of guy friends who are like, hey, you play games, you're a girl, like tell me how to get my girlfriend into games. And I think I always say, look at what other medias they like. Do they like specific type of games? Do they like specific type of movies, specific type of anime? Because there's so many different types of games, and if you bring someone who's new into the world of gaming and you give them a game that like is not going to be interesting enough to them, they're going to be like, oh, this is what gaming is? Meh. But if you're like, hey, this person loves, creation type of things, and they're a crafty type of person. I think Minecraft is a great example for that. If you have somebody who watches a lot of like action anime, you might want to be like, hey, dude, there's a Dragon Ball Z game, come play that with me, or like a fighting game. I think that there's just so many different platforms and so many different types of content. You just have to find the right one for the person that you're trying to get into game.
I would say Ratchet and Clank is one of my favorites because it's fun, it's lighthearted, and as far as like skills level, it eases you in. It's not super hard right away.
Yeah, just completely biased recommendation. I really like Stardew Valley. My friends are laughing at me because they knew I was going to say it. It's very casual, and you can kind of do whatever you want, and you can kind of, if you want to go fight things, you can go fight things, and if you want to grow plants, you can grow plants or make friends. And that community, like the online real people community, is also very welcoming. And I know a lot of people who don't really play games but have really loved that game and gone out and picked up more titles.
That game is made by one dude. It's insane how much content they created. What was that again?
Stardew Valley. It's a farming simulator, kind of. It's an indie game. It was a whole entire game made by one person, which is mind-blowing. The art, the music, the game design, the coding, all of it was one person, which is also
if you're a fan of
insane.
Harvest Moon, you will like that.
Yes.
Well, thank you, panelists, and thank you all for being here, and thank you so much to the Coronado Library for having us.